The emergency lights bathed the Galactic Assembly Chamber in harsh blue light as Ambassador Crick stepped to the central podium, his three eyes scanning the hundreds of species representatives gathered in tense silence. And his voice carried across the vast space with the weight of dire news that would shake the foundation of their peaceful existence. "Honored delegates," Crix began, his mandibles clicking nervously, "we face a crisis unlike any in our recorded history. For 50 cycles we have maintained the quarantine around the Sol system, keeping humanity isolated from civilized space. And now that quarantine has been broken, a wave of alarmed sounds rippled through the chamber. Hisses, chirps, electronic pulses of species from across the galaxy processed this information. And Crix raised his primary appendage to restore order before continuing with his grim report. Our deep space monitoring stations detected a massive vessel leaving Earth system 3 days ago, he explained, projecting holographic images that materialized above the assembly floor, showing a ship of unprecedented size and aggressive design. This vessel, which human transmissions identify as the IN's Defiance, is heading directly toward the neutral zone boundary, and initial scans reveal energy signatures that exceed anything our combined technologies have ever produced. The hologram rotated slowly, displaying the battleship from multiple angles, and even the most seasoned military representatives in the chamber felt their confidence waver at the sight of such raw power contained in a single vessel. Because humanity had been isolated specifically because they came from a death world, because their nature was unpredictable and violent, and because first contact 50 years ago had ended in tragedy. Security Chief Vorton of the Rendari Empire stood from his delegation seat, his scaled face twisted in barely contained anger, and his voice boomed across the chamber with military authority. "We warned you all decades ago that quarantining the humans was not enough," Vorton declared, his clawed fist striking his chest plate. "Their military doctrine, which we studied from captured data files, is based entirely on overwhelming force and shock tactics. They do not negotiate. They do not compromise. They only know conquest and domination." Ambassador Crix nodded gravely, though his expression suggested reluctance to fully agree with such harsh assessments, and he brought up additional data streams showing human military history, wars that spanned their entire planet, weapons of devastating power, conflicts that consumed millions of their own species. "The evidence is clear," another delegate added from the Yavali section, her voice trembling slightly. "Humanity must be contained before they reach populated space. We cannot allow a species this dangerous to threaten the peace we have maintained for 1,000 cycles." The debate raged for hours, voices rising in fear and anger, proposals ranging from diplomatic outreach to preemptive military strikes. And finally, the vote was called with tension crackling through the assembled representatives like electricity. The resolution passed by overwhelming majority. Mobilize the Third Fleet immediately. Establish a defensive blockade at the neutral zone boundary, and prepare to use whatever force necessary to turn back the human vessel before it could threaten civilized space. Meanwhile, millions of kilometers away in the darkness between stars, Captain Daniel Hayes stood on the bridge of IN's Defiance with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the main view screen display the vast emptiness of space that humanity had been forbidden to explore for half a century. "Captain, we're picking up increased transmission activity from multiple alien sources," Lieutenant Commander Lisa Grant reported from her station at Communications, her fingers dancing across holographic controls. "They know we're coming?" Daniel nodded slowly, his weathered face showing no surprise at this news, because they had expected the galaxy's reaction would be fear. After all, Earth had spent 50 years in isolation, cut off from the galactic community, treated like a prison colony for the crime of being born on a harsh world. "What's our current status?" Daniel asked, his voice calm and steady despite the weight of responsibility pressing on his shoulders. All systems nominal. Sir, replied Kyle Morris from the navigation console. The young officer's hands steady as he monitored their course. We're maintaining speed and should reach the neutral zone boundary in approximately 18 hours. Patricia Webb at the communication station turned to face her captain. Concern evident in her dark eyes, and her voice carried a question that everyone on the bridge was thinking. Sir, the transmissions we're intercepting suggest they're assembling a fleet to stop us, she said carefully, choosing her words with diplomatic precision. Do you want me to send another message explaining our peaceful intentions? Daniel shook his head slowly, his jaw set with determination that had carried him through 20 years of military service. And he remembered the day Earth's government had approached him with this mission, asking him to command the ship that would either bring humanity into the galactic community or cement their status as eternal outcasts. They already know our intentions. Lieutenant, Daniel replied quietly, we've sent diplomatic messages for 50 years. Everyone ignored or rejected without consideration. They don't fear our words. They fear our existence. Chief Engineer Raymond Clark's voice crackled over the internal communication system, his gruff tone carrying satisfaction despite the dire circumstances. Captain, I'm pleased to report the main reactor is performing beyond specifications, Raymond announced. We could sustain full defensive power for weeks if necessary, and offensive systems are ready on your command. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, Chief, Daniel responded. Though everyone on the bridge understood the likelihood of peaceful passage was minimal at best, the bridge crew worked in focused silence, each officer attending to their duties with professional dedication. Yet the tension was palpable as they drew closer to the boundary where the galaxy had drawn its line. The invisible wall that separated humanity from the stars. Nicole Bryant, at Tactical, looked up from her sensor displays, her expression troubled as she processed incoming data. Captain, I'm detecting multiple ship signatures ahead, she reported, her voice tightening with concern. Configuration suggests a blockade formation. Current count is over 200 vessels and climbing. Daniel walked to the front of the bridge, standing before the main view screen as it displayed tactical data overlaying the star field. And he could see them now, hundreds of alien warships forming a wall of steel and energy, all of them focused on stopping one human vessel from reaching assembly space. They're scared, Lisa Grant observed softly from her position beside the captain. They've assembled a fleet large enough to conquer a solar system just to stop us. Fear makes people do terrible things, Daniel agreed, his mind drifting to his daughter Emma back on Earth, remembering her question before he left. Why don't they want to know us? Why does being different make us monsters? He had no good answer then, and he had none now. Only the determination to prove that humanity deserved better than eternal quarantine. That strength and peaceful intentions could coexist. That Earth's children could walk among the stars without conquest or domination. All hands. This is the captain, Daniel announced over the ship-wide communications, his voice reaching every crew member aboard Defiance. In 18 hours, we'll reach the neutral zone boundary where an alien fleet waits to turn us back. I won't lie to you. They're frightened of us. They see Earth's battleship and assume the worst about our intentions. He paused, letting his words sink in, giving his crew time to process what lay ahead. But we're going to prove them wrong, he continued with fierce conviction. We're going to show them that humanity came seeking dialogue, not domination. We're going to reach the assembly and demand Earth's voice be heard. And we're going to do it without firing the first shot, no matter what they throw at us. The bridge crew straightened at their stations, pride mixing with apprehension. And Daniel felt a surge of confidence in these men and women who had volunteered for a mission that might end in their deaths. Patricia Webb's console chimed with an incoming transmission. and she looked up with barely concealed surprise. "Captain, we're receiving a hail from the Third Fleet," she reported. "They're demanding we power down all systems and prepare to be boarded. They're giving us 6 hours to comply." Daniel returned to his command chair and sat down, his fingers drumming once on the armrest before he made his decision. "Send our response." "Lieutenant," he ordered calmly, "inform Third Fleet that we are on a diplomatic mission to the Galactic Assembly. We request peaceful passage as is our right under interstellar law, and we will not deviate from our course." Patricia composed the message and sent it, though her expression suggested she knew the response would not be favorable, and indeed, within minutes the alien fleet's reply came back with cold finality. "Continue your approach, and you will be fired upon the Bridge of Inns." Defiance fell silent as the ultimatum hung in the air like a death sentence. And Captain Daniel Hayes sat in his chair with the weight of humanity's future resting squarely on his shoulders, knowing that in less than 18 hours, the galaxy would discover whether Earth's children came in peace or war. "Maintain course and speed," Daniel ordered, his voice cutting through the tension. "Let's see if they have the courage to follow." The Third Fleet formed a massive wall of warships spanning thousands of kilometers across the neutral zone boundary. 300 vessels from a dozen different species, all aimed toward a single point in space where humanity's battleship would emerge from faster-than-light travel. And Fleet Commander Salkis stood on his flagship's command deck with tentacles wrapped tightly around his control station. "All ships report ready status," his tactical officer announced, her crystalline voice chiming with nervous energy. "Weapon systems charged and targeting solutions calculated. We can engage the moment they drop from warp." Salkis nodded his bulbous head, though uncertainty gnawed at his thoughts like a persistent parasite. Because in all his years commanding fleets, he had never faced a single vessel with firepower readings that matched an entire battle group. And the human ship's energy signature defied every principle of physics the galaxy understood. "Remember your orders." Salkis broadcast to all fleet vessels. "We fire only if they refuse to power down. This is a containment operation, not an extermination. We seek to protect civilized space, not start a war." Even as he spoke those words, Salkis wondered if the distinction would matter once weapons began firing. And he thought about his offspring back on his homeworld, hoping he would return to see them grow into adulthood. The sensors erupted with alerts as space itself seemed to tear open. And the human battleship dropped from warp directly in front of the assembled fleet, its massive hull blocking out stars, its surface bristling with weapons arrays and shield generators that pulsed with barely contained energy. INS Defiance held position at the boundary, neither advancing nor retreating, and for a long moment the two forces simply stared at each other across the void like ancient predators, deciding whether to fight or flee. Captain Daniel Hayes studied the tactical display showing 300 hostile vessels surrounding his ship, and he felt the weight of every eye on the bridge watching him, waiting for his command, trusting his judgment to guide them through this crisis. "Open a channel to the fleet commander," Daniel ordered, and Patricia Webb quickly established the communications link. Fleet Commander Salkis appeared on the view screen, his alien features unreadable to human eyes, but his body language suggesting extreme tension. And his translator rendered his words with mechanical precision. "Human vessel, you are in violation of the soul quarantine," Salkis stated formally. "Power down all systems immediately and prepare to be boarded. Any resistance will be met with overwhelming force. You have 5 minutes to comply." Daniel leaned forward in his command chair, his expression calm but his voice carrying the weight of 50 years of frustration and isolation. "Fleet Commander, we are on a diplomatic mission to the Galactic Assembly," Daniel replied evenly. "We request peaceful passage as representatives of Earth. We have no hostile intentions and have not powered any offensive systems. Salkis's tentacles twitched in what might have been the alien equivalent of a laugh or perhaps an expression of disbelief. Diplomatic? Salkis responded. You approach our space in a warship that could level a planet. You expect us to believe you come in peace when every sensor reading shows you built this vessel for destruction? We built this vessel to survive, Daniel corrected him, his voice hardening slightly. We built it strong enough that you couldn't destroy it as easily as you destroyed our first diplomatic ship 50 years ago. The accusation hung in space between them. And Salkis recoiled slightly as if struck, because the official records claimed that first contact had been humanity's fault, that the human ship had transmitted threatening signals. But doubt crept into his mind. Your time is up, human, Salkis declared, though his voice carried less certainty than before. Power down now or we will open fire. Daniel glanced at Lisa Grant, who stood beside his chair with her hand resting on the armrest, and she gave him a slight nod of support. Then he looked at each of his bridge crew in turn, seeing determination mixed with fear. And he made his decision. Raise shields, Daniel commanded quietly. Defensive power only. No weapons. Gregory Palmer at the science station activated the shield generators. And immediately the energy signature from Defiance spiked dramatically, washing across every sensor in the Third Fleet, with readings that suggested impossible power generation on Salkis's flagship. Alarms began shrieking as the tactical displays lit up with warning indicators. And his tactical officer turned to him with wide eyes filled with panic. Commander, that energy spike, it's enormous, she exclaimed. They're preparing to fire. All ships engage, Salkis shouted, making the split-second decision born from fear and training. Fire at will. 300 warships opened fire simultaneously in a coordinated assault that would have reduced a moon to rubble. Energy beams and projectile weapons converging on IN's Defiance from every angle, creating a storm of destructive force that lit up space like a newborn star on the bridge of Defiance. The crew braced themselves as weapons fire hammered against their shields in an endless barrage, the ship shuddering with each impact, displays flickering as power systems strained to maintain defensive integrity. Shield status. Daniel called over the sound of stressed metal and energy feedback, holding at 92%. Nicole Bryant reported from Tactical, her voice steady despite the chaos. Their weapons are having minimal effect. Sir, the bombardment continued for 3 full minutes as the Third Fleet poured every weapon in their arsenal at the human ship, exhausting energy reserves and ammunition stockpiles in a desperate attempt to penetrate shields that absorbed everything they could throw at it. Finally, the firing ceased as the alien fleet's weapons ran dry, and an eerie silence descended over the battlefield as both sides assessed the results. And Fleet Commander Salkis stared at his tactical display in growing horror as it showed the human vessel still intact, still functioning, still maintaining position as if nothing had happened. Shield integrity? Salkis asked his tactical officer, though he already knew the answer. Their shields are at 87%, she whispered. Commander, we hit them with everything and barely scratched their defenses, on Defiance. Captain Hayes stood from his command chair and walked to the front of the bridge, his jaw set with disappointment rather than anger. And he gestured for Patricia to open a channel to all Third Fleet vessels. This is Captain Daniel Hayes of Earth, he announced, his voice carrying across open frequencies to every ship in the alien fleet. We came here, seeking dialogue. We came here hoping to prove that humanity deserves a voice in galactic affairs. We came here in peace. He paused, letting his words sink in, watching the view screen display the hundreds of alien ships that had just tried to destroy his vessel. But you chose violence without even listening to what we had to say, Daniel continued. And now anger crept into his tone. You judged us guilty without trial. You attacked first and asked questions never. And now you've seen that Earth's children learn to build strong walls after you destroyed our first attempt at reaching out to you. Lisa Grant stepped forward, her hand moving to Daniel's shoulder in a gesture of both support and caution. Because she knew what came next, they all knew. And the weight of it pressed down on everyone aboard. Since you chose to show us what the galaxy thinks of humanity, Daniel said, his voice dropping to something cold and hard. We'll show you what we're truly capable of. Power up all weapon systems, he commanded, turning back to his crew. Let them see what they're really facing. Andrew Phillips at the weapons console hesitated for just a moment, understanding the magnitude of this action. Then his training took over, and he began bringing offensive systems online. And the energy signature from Defiance doubled, then tripled, climbing to levels that caused sensor arrays across the Third Fleet to overload and reset. Panic rippled through the alien formation as ships detected the massive power buildup, and several vessels at the rear of the fleet began backing away, their commanders deciding that discretion was preferable to certain death. Target solution calculated. Sir, Andrew reported, his voice tight with tension. Main cannon ready. Select a target far from any vessels, Daniel ordered. Empty space, asteroid belt. Anything that shows them the power we're holding back. Andrew adjusted his targeting solution, locking onto a distant asteroid field that drifted in the outer system, far from any inhabited zones. And he looked to his captain for final confirmation. Fire, Daniel commanded. The main cannon of INS. Defiance unleashed a beam of concentrated energy that tore through space like a spear thrown by an angry god, crossing millions of kilometers in seconds. And when it struck the asteroid field, the results were catastrophic and beautiful. 17 asteroids vaporizing in a chain reaction that created a brief new sun in the darkness. Every sensor in the Third Fleet recorded the impact, calculating the destructive force, running simulations of what that weapon could do to their vessels. And the results made seasoned military commanders feel their confidence crumble like those destroyed asteroids. Commander, 3 ships have broken formation, Salkas's tactical officer reported, her voice breaking slightly. They're fleeing the engagement zone. Salkis stared at the demonstration of power still glowing on his tactical display, and he understood with terrible clarity that his fleet could not win this fight, that humanity had built a weapon system. News of the Third Fleet's defeat spread across the galaxy faster than light itself, carried on communication networks that connected thousands of worlds. And within hours, every species in the Galactic Assembly knew that 300 warships had failed to stop a single human vessel, that Earth's battleship had absorbed their combined firepower and emerged unscathed, that humanity possessed military technology decades beyond anything the civilized galaxy had achieved. Ambassador Crix convened an emergency war council in a secure chamber deep within Assembly Station, surrounded by military leaders whose faces show varying degrees of fear and anger. And the holographic display at the center of the room showed tactical footage of the engagement playing on endless repeat. This changes everything, Defense Minister Tolvac declared, his scaled fist striking the conference table hard enough to make the surface crack. The humans have proven themselves a direct military threat to galactic security. We must respond with overwhelming force before they construct more of these warships. Intelligence Director Yessa, a being composed of pure energy contained within a crystalline matrix, pulsed with colors that indicated deep concern as her translated voice filled the chamber. Our agents have intercepted communications from Earth's orbital shipyards, she reported. They are constructing at least 7 more vessels of similar design, possibly as many as 12. Within 5 cycles, humanity could field a fleet capable of challenging our entire combined military. The other delegates murmured among themselves, fear spreading like a virus through the War Council. Because military superiority had maintained galactic peace for centuries, the threat of unified response had prevented countless wars. And now a single species threatened to upset that balance. We must mobilize the Grand Armada, Tolvac insisted, his voice rising with urgency. 7,000 ships from across the assembly. We crush this human vessel before it reaches our core systems. We demonstrate that no species, no matter how powerful, can threaten the established order. And if they have weapons we haven't seen yet? Another delegate challenged. If their battleship is merely the beginning of capabilities we cannot comprehend. The debate raged for hours as military minds grappled with an unprecedented situation. Proposals ranging from diplomatic outreach to complete military annihilation. And eventually, the vote was called with the chamber divided almost evenly between fear and aggression. Resolution passed by narrow margin. Mobilize the Grand Armada. Intercept the human vessel before it reaches assembly space. And prepare for military engagement if diplomacy fails. Meanwhile, 3 days' journey from assembly core systems. In's Defiance traveled through the darkness between stars, passing through inhabited space where civilian vessels fled their approach like prey animals sensing a predator. Entire planets shutting down orbital traffic when Defiance entered their star system's captain Daniel Hayes stood in the observation deck watching a distant colony world through the reinforced windows, seeing the lights of civilization glowing on the dark side of the planet. And his heart ached with the knowledge that those people feared him, feared his crew, feared everything humanity represented. It never gets easier, does it? Dr. Helen Carter asked, approaching the captain with 2 cups of coffee, one of which she offered to him. Daniel accepted the coffee with a grateful nod and took a long sip before responding, his eyes never leaving the view of the distant world. I knew we'd be feared, he admitted quietly. I knew the galaxy would see our weapons and assume the worst. But seeing children being evacuated from space stations as we pass, watching families flee the planet-side shelters, it makes me wonder if we're making things worse instead of better. Helen stood beside him, following his gaze to the colony world, and her voice carried the wisdom of someone who had spent decades treating both physical and emotional wounds. Fear is a natural response to the unknown, she said gently. For 50 years we've been the monsters in their closet. The Death Worlders locked away where they couldn't harm civilized species. Changing that perception won't happen overnight. It might take generations. I don't have generations, Daniel replied, his weathered face showing the weight of command. I have maybe 3 days before we face the largest fleet ever assembled. 3 days to prove that humans aren't the monsters they think we are. In the medical bay, several decks below, Helen had been treating crew members for psychological stress. Good men and women who joined this mission believing they would bring humanity into the galactic community, only to discover that they were hated before anyone even knew their names. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Grant entered the observation deck carrying a data tablet, her expression troubled as she approached the captain and doctor. Sir, we're receiving reports from long-range sensors, she announced, her voice carefully controlled despite the alarming information. The assembly is mobilizing a massive fleet. Current estimates suggest 7,000 vessels from over 40 species. They're gathering at a rally point 3 days from our current position. Daniel set down his coffee cup, his jaw tightening as he processed this information. Because 300 ships had been a challenge to face down peacefully, but 7,000 represented the full military might of the galactic civilization. They're not taking any chances this time, he observed quietly. They're bringing everything they have. Can we fight that many? Lisa asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. We could hurt them badly, Daniel admitted. Our weapons would devastate their fleet. We could probably destroy hundreds of ships before they overwhelmed us through sheer numbers. But we'd lose in the end, and more importantly, we'd prove every terrible thing they believe about humanity. He turned from the window to face his executive officer, his eyes reflecting the impossible choice before them. Continue toward almost certain death, or turn back and condemn Earth to eternal isolation. Gather the senior staff, Daniel ordered. We need to discuss our options. An hour later, the bridge officers assembled in the conference room adjacent to the main bridge, their faces showing varying degrees of concern and determination. And Captain Hayes stood at the head of the table with tactical displays showing the gathering alien armada. I want everyone here to understand the situation clearly, Daniel began, his voice steady despite the dire circumstances. In 3 days, we'll encounter a fleet of 7,000 warships. They have orders to stop us by any means necessary, and they likely have authorization to destroy Defiance if we refuse to turn back. He paused, letting that sink in, watching his officers process the reality of what they faced. I'm giving everyone a choice, he continued. We have shuttles with faster-than-light capability. Anyone who wants to return to Earth can take them. No one will think less of you for choosing to live. This mission was always dangerous. But none of us signed up for a suicide run. The room fell silent as the crew looked at each other, considering the offer, weighing survival against purpose. And finally, Kyle Morris at Navigation spoke up. With respect, sir. We all knew this might be a one-way trip, the young officer said. We volunteered to be the ones who finally got humanity a voice in galactic affairs. Turning back now would mean the last 50 years of isolation were for nothing. The kid's right, Raymond Clark added, his gruff voice carrying absolute conviction. We built this ship to survive meeting a hostile galaxy. If we run at the first sign of serious opposition, we prove we're exactly what they think we are. Cowards who hide behind big guns. Around the table, heads nodded in agreement, and Nicole Bryant leaned forward with fierce determination in her eyes. Captain, we came here to change history, she said firmly. That doesn't happen by running home when things get difficult. It happens by showing them we're willing to risk everything for a chance at peace. Daniel felt pride surge through him as he looked at these brave men and women who had become family during the long journey from Earth. And he understood that they would follow him into certain death if he asked it. Then we continue forward, he declared, his voice ringing with resolve. But we're going to be smart about this. We're not soldiers looking for a glorious death. We're diplomats who happen to command a very powerful ship. Gregory Palmer pulled up star charts and tactical data, his scientific mind already working on solutions to impossible problems. If we can broadcast directly to assembly civilian governments, bypass their military channels, he suggested, we might be able to generate political pressure that restrains the Armada. The problem is getting our message through their communication networks, Patricia Webb interjected. Military channels are encrypted and civilian networks are heavily monitored. What if we don't ask permission? Andrew Phillips proposed, his tactical mind finding unconventional solutions. We have enough power to overwhelm their communication satellites. Broadcast on every frequency simultaneously. Make it impossible to ignore us. That would be seen as an aggressive act, Lisa Grant cautioned. Though her expression suggested she was considering the idea, everything we do is seen as aggressive. Daniel replied, we exist as a threat to their worldview. But if we can reach their civilian populations directly, show them we're not monsters, maybe some of them will question their leaders' decisions. The discussion continued for hours as the crew developed a plan born of the Grand Armada stretched across space like a steel net designed to catch a single fish. 7,000 warships representing 43 different species, all united by a common purpose: prevent the human battleship from reaching assembly space. and Supreme Commander Dravik stood on his massive flagship surveying the fleet with satisfaction, believing that not even Earth's technological superiority could overcome such overwhelming numbers. All fleet elements report ready status, his tactical coordinator announced, her antennae twitching with anticipation. The human vessel will drop from faster-than-light travel in approximately 1 hour. All ships have firing solutions calculated and are prepared to execute coordinated assault on your command. Dravik nodded his armored head. His multiple eyes focused on the tactical display showing the deployment of his forces. And he felt confident that this day would be remembered as the moment when the assembly demonstrated its strength. When humanity learned that power without permission would not be tolerated, when they arrive, we give them one chance to surrender, Dravik instructed, though his tone suggested he expected refusal. If they decline, we eliminate the threat completely. No warnings, no second chances. We cannot allow this vessel to reach our core systems. Meanwhile, aboard In's Defiance, the crew made final preparations as they approached the moment that would define their mission. Captain Daniel Hayes sat in his command chair reviewing the speech he would broadcast to billions of civilians across assembly space, while his officers worked at their stations with focused determination. Captain, we're 15 minutes from dropping out of warp, Kyle Morris reported from navigation, his voice steady despite the enormous pressure. The Grand Armada is exactly where our projections indicated. Communications are ready, Patricia Webb confirmed, her fingers hovering over the controls that would transmit their message across every frequency the assembly used. The moment we drop from warp, I can initiate the broadcast. It'll take them at least 5 minutes to block all channels. Weapon systems are fully charged, Andrew Phillips added from Tactical. If diplomacy fails, we're ready to defend ourselves. Daniel stood from his command chair and walked to the front of the bridge, looking at each of his crew members in turn, seeing determination mixed with fear, courage mixed with doubt. And he felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility for these lives entrusted to his command, whatever happens in the next hour. I want you all to know that serving with you has been the greatest honor of my life, he said quietly, his voice carrying to every station. Earth chose us to be her voice, and we're going to make sure the galaxy hears what we have to say. Lisa Grant stepped up beside him, her hand briefly touching his shoulder in a gesture of support and solidarity. 10 seconds to warp exit, Kyle announced, counting down as space itself prepared to release them into the confrontation zone. The view screen flared with light as Defiance dropped from faster-than-light travel directly before the assembled armada. And for a moment, both forces simply existed in the same space, human and alien, separated by fear and misunderstanding, but connected by the shared knowledge that what happened next would echo through galactic history. Broadcasting now, Patricia declared, activating the communications plan they had developed. And her signal overwhelmed assembly satellites, forcing its way onto every civilian network, every government channel, every communication device in dozens of star systems. Captain Hayes' face appeared on billions of screens across the galaxy, his weathered features showing both strength and compassion, and his voice carried across the void with words that had been refined through countless drafts and revisions. Citizens of the Galactic Assembly, my name is Captain Daniel Hayes of Earth, and I speak to you today not as a conqueror, but as a representative of humanity, a species you have feared for 50 years without ever truly knowing us, he began, his tone neither aggressive nor pleading but simply honest. 50 years ago, Earth sent a diplomatic vessel to make first contact with your civilization, unarmed and carrying only messages of peace and hope for mutual understanding, Daniel continued. And the broadcast included video footage recovered from the destroyed ship's data core, showing human diplomats smiling and preparing communication protocols. That vessel was destroyed without warning by a Yavali military commander who perceived a threat where none existed, Hayes stated. The video showing the attack, human voices calling out peaceful intentions, even as weapons fire tore through their ship. Everyone aboard died believing that the galaxy was willing to listen, that reaching out with open hands would be met with open minds. The broadcast switched to show Earth from space, the blue and green world that humanity called home, cities glowing in the darkness, space stations orbiting in peaceful coordination. Earth was then quarantined for 50 years, imprisoned in our own system, told we were too dangerous for civilized space, too violent, too unpredictable, Daniel explained, his voice carrying the weight of decades of isolation. We were judged guilty without trial, condemned for the crime of being born on a harsh world that made us strong. For 50 years, we watched the stars and wondered if we would ever be allowed to reach them. He continued, we built this ship, In's Defiance, not to conquer but to survive. Because we knew the galaxy would fear us. We knew we needed strength enough that we couldn't be destroyed as easily as our first attempt at reaching out. The broadcast showed construction footage of Defiance, revealing not a weapon of war, but a ship designed with living quarters, gardens, schools. Because humanity had built not just a battleship, but a home that could travel the stars. We came here to ask for one simple thing. Let Earth a voice in galactic affairs. Let humanity contribute to the civilization you've built. Let us prove that strength and peace can coexist, Daniel said, his eyes seeming to look directly at each viewer. We don't seek conquest. We don't demand submission. We ask only for the opportunity to be heard. Supreme Commander Dravik watched the broadcast from his flagship with growing fury, realizing that the humans had outmaneuvered him politically before the military engagement could even begin. And he barked orders at his communications officer to block the transmission. Sir, we're trying, the officer responded desperately. But they're broadcasting on every frequency with more power than we can counter. It'll take at least 10 minutes to coordinate a full communications blackout. By then, the damage would be done. Dravik knew, because across the assembly civilian populations were watching a human speak for the first time, seeing not a monster, but a man who looked tired and hopeful and absolutely sincere. We know many of you fear us, Hayes concluded his broadcast. Fear is understandable when facing the unknown. But I'm offering you something unprecedented. Come aboard Defiance. See for yourselves what humanity really is. Meet our crew, walk our corridors, and then decide if we're truly the threat you've been told we are. He gave coordinates where assembly representatives could dock with his vessel. And his final words carried both challenge and invitation. The choice is yours. Citizens of the galaxy, Daniel said, you can allow fear to dictate your response. Or you can choose understanding. We'll be waiting. The broadcast ended. And for several moments, space itself seemed to hold its breath. Then the reaction began like a shockwave spreading across assembly space. Civilian governments demanding explanations from military leaders. Social networks exploding with debate. Citizens questioning the narrative they had been fed for 50 years. Senator Prin of the Kavari. People seized the political opportunity with the skill of a lifetime diplomat, calling for an immediate civilian assembly session to discuss Earth's petition. Her voice adding legitimacy to what could have been dismissed as enemy propaganda within the Grand Armada itself. The broadcast created confusion and division. Some commanders remained committed to Dravik's orders, but others found themselves questioning whether destroying the human vessel was truly in the Assembly's best interests. Sir, we're receiving stand-down orders from 16-member governments, Dravik's coordinator reported with alarm. They're withdrawing their ships from the Armada. They have no authority to do that. Dravik roared, his fury at losing control of the situation overwhelming his tactical judgment. I command this fleet, and I say we engage the human vessel immediately. But even as he gave the order, hundreds of ships began breaking formation, their commanders choosing to obey their own governments rather than a military leader, whose authority was suddenly in question on Defiance's bridge. The crew watched as the massive armada began to fracture, some ships powering down weapons while others maintained combat readiness. And the tactical display showed chaos where moments before had been unified opposition. "Captain, we're receiving requests to dock from 27 assembly representatives," Patricia reported with barely concealed surprise. "Senator Prynne is leading the delegation. They're accepting your invitation." Daniel felt hope surge through him for the first time since leaving Earth, because someone was willing to listen. Someone was willing to see past the fear and give humanity a chance. "Lower shields at docking port 3, he commanded. "Prepare to receive our guests, and Lisa, assemble a welcoming committee. Let's show them the best of what humanity can be." "Sir, I need to advise against this." Senator Prynne's question hung in the air like a challenge to everything the galaxy believed about humanity. And Captain Daniel Hayes stood at the observation window, looking at the stars with an expression that mixed sadness with hope. "Because revenge would have made us exactly what you feared," he answered quietly, his reflection in the window showing the weight of command etched into every line of his face. Earth's history is full of groups attacking what they don't understand. Wars fought because people couldn't see past their differences. And humanity decided we would break that cycle. We would be better than our worst impulses. Prynne's large eyes studied the human captain with growing respect, and her translator carried the emotional undertones of her response. "You built the most powerful warship in galactic history as an act of peace," she asked, seeking to understand the paradox. "That seems contradictory." "We built it strong enough that you couldn't destroy us without listening first," Daniel corrected gently. "Strength and peaceful intentions aren't contradictory, Senator. Sometimes the only way to prevent violence is to make violence against you too costly to attempt. But the key is choosing not to use that strength for conquest." Communications Officer Patricia Webb interrupted the philosophical discussion with urgent news from her station in the bridge. "Captain, Supreme Commander Dravik is refusing to stand down," she reported, her voice tight with concern. "He's rallied approximately 2,000 ships that remain loyal to him. They're moving to attack positions. And he's broadcasting that the Assembly civilian government has been compromised by human manipulation." Daniel exchanged glances with Senator Prynne, and her expression showed alarm at this development. Because Dravik was attempting a military coup, using fear of humanity as justification to override civilian authority. "We need to return to our ships immediately," Prynne declared, her diplomatic training taking over. "If Dravik attacks Defiance now, he'll be firing on a vessel carrying assembly representatives. That's an act of war against our own governments." "That's exactly what I'm counting on," Daniel replied, a strategic mind working through the possibilities. He's so focused on the human threat that he's willing to risk civil war. And that tells me everything I need to know about his judgment. The alien delegation rushed back to their shuttles and departed Defiance quickly, racing to rejoin their fleets before the situation deteriorated further. And Captain Hayes returned to his bridge where his crew monitored the chaotic movements of thousands of ships trying to decide between following orders or following conscience. "Tactical report?" Daniel commanded as he took his seat. 2,000 vessels under Dravik's command are forming attack formation. Nicole Bryant reported from her station. The remaining 5,000 are scattered, some maintaining defensive positions, others withdrawing entirely. The Armada has effectively split into factions. "And the delegates?" Lisa Grant asked anxiously. "Clear of the engagement zone," Patricia confirmed. "Senator Prynne is broadcasting on all channels, ordering Dravik to stand down and condemning his actions as illegal military insurrection." Kyle Morris pulled up strategic projections on the main view screen. showing the likely outcome of different engagement scenarios. And none of them ended without significant casualties on both sides. "Sir, if Dravik's forces attack, we can defend ourselves," Andrew Phillips stated from weapons control. "But even with our technological advantage, fighting 2,000 ships will result in massive loss of life, both theirs and potentially ours." Daniel studied the tactical display with narrowed eyes, his mind racing through options, searching for a solution that didn't involve killing thousands of people who were simply following their commander's orders. "What if we don't fight back?" Dr. Helen Carter suggested from where she observed the bridge operations. "What if we just take the hits and prove we're not the threat Dravik claims we are? Our shields can't sustain fire from 2,000 ships indefinitely." Raymond Clark countered over the communications system from engineering. "Eventually they'd break through and start doing real damage. We'd be gambling the lives of everyone aboard on the hope that someone stops Dravik before he destroys us. Sometimes that's what peace requires," Daniel replied quietly, an idea forming in his mind. "But I have a better option, Patricia. Open a channel to all ships in the Armada, both Dravik's forces and the neutral vessels." "Channel open." "Sir," she confirmed. "This is Captain Hayes to all assembly forces," Daniel broadcast, his voice carrying across the void to thousands of listening crews. "I know many of you believe we're a threat. I know Commander Dravik has convinced you that humanity must be destroyed to preserve galactic security. So I'm going to prove him wrong in the most definitive way possible." He paused for effect, letting anticipation build before continuing. "I'm ordering IN's Defiance to power down all weapon systems," Daniel announced. And shocked silence filled the bridge as his crew absorbed this command. "We're going to lower our shields and hold position. We will not defend ourselves if attacked, because I will not allow fear and misunderstanding to start a war that could consume this entire sector." "Captain, that's suicide," Nicole protested, her professional judgment warring with her loyalty to her commanding officer. "That's trust," Daniel corrected her. "I'm trusting that the majority of people out there are reasonable, that when faced with the choice of killing defenseless people or questioning their commander's judgment, they'll choose compassion over fear." Lisa Grant understood what her captain was attempting. A gambit so bold that it would either end the confrontation peacefully or end with Defiance being destroyed. And she moved to stand beside his chair in a gesture of support. "All hands. This is the captain," Daniel announced over the ship-wide communications. "I'm ordering us to stand down completely. Power down all weapons, lower shields, and maintain position. I know this seems insane, but I believe in the fundamental decency of the people we're facing. Trust me one more time." The bridge crew looked at each other with expressions mixing doubt and faith. Then slowly they began executing the captain's orders. Weapon systems powering down, shield generators going offline, leaving Defiance completely vulnerable in space, surrounded by thousands of warships on his flagship. Supreme Commander Dravik watched his sensors confirm that the human vessel had indeed rendered itself defenseless. And triumph surged through him, because now nothing stood between him and eliminating the threat to galactic order. "All ships, commence firing," Dravik ordered, his voice cold with determination. "Destroy the human vessel completely." But as his order transmitted across his formation, something unexpected happened. His own officers hesitated, looking at their targeting displays showing a defenseless ship, questioning whether destroying an unresisting target was really military necessity or simply murder. Commander Salkis, who had faced Defiance once before and learned hard lessons about jumping to conclusions, made a decision that would define his legacy. He broadcast on the command frequency to all ships under Dravik's authority. "This is Commander Salkis to all fleet elements." His voice rang out clearly. "I will not fire on a defenseless vessel. I will not kill people who have proven their peaceful intentions through action. Commander Dravik's orders are illegal and immoral. Any ship that follows me, take defensive positions between Dravik's flagship and the human vessel. 3,000 ships that had been preparing to attack suddenly changed course, moving to form a protective wall between Defiance and the remaining vessels loyal to Dravik. Former enemies becoming allies in the span of heartbeats, choosing understanding over fear. Species that had been rivals for centuries found themselves fighting side by side to protect humanity's right to exist. And the political implications would reshape the assembly for generations. Dravik found himself suddenly outnumbered and surrounded by ships that moments before had been under his command. And his tactical display showed the impossible situation with brutal clarity. He could not win. His authority had collapsed. And continuing to fight would make him a war criminal rather than a defender of civilization. Stand down. Dravik ordered his remaining forces, defeat bitter in his voice. Power down weapons and withdraw from the engagement zone. The crisis ended not with weapons fire, but with a collective sigh of relief that rippled through thousands of crews across the battle space. And aboard Defiance, the crew allowed themselves to believe they had actually survived this impossible mission. Captain, we're receiving a transmission from the civilian assembly, Patricia reported, tears of relief running down her face. They're inviting you to address them formally. They're ready to vote on ending Earth's quarantine. Daniel felt emotions he had suppressed for weeks suddenly threatened to overwhelm him, and he gripped the armrests of his command chair to steady himself before responding. Inform them we accept their invitation, he said, his voice rough with feeling, and someone get me a secure channel to Earth. I need to tell them we succeeded. The following day, Captain Daniel Hayes stood before the Galactic Assembly in the Great Chamber, where so many momentous decisions had been made throughout history. And this time, there was no emergency lighting, no crisis atmosphere. Only the patient attention of delegates from hundreds of worlds waiting to hear what humanity's representative would say. Honored delegates,